Okay. So just briefly, since I understand there were some questions about this, I want to briefly show you my understanding of the git-flow model. So maybe some people in the room know more than me, so feel free to interact and tell me if I'm wrong. And also a bit how we have been applying it into AiiDA and what we've been learning from our experience. So what git-flow is a way to organize the way you do branches and releases for branches for new features, branches for new releases in a kind of organized way when you have a team and a relatively large code base. I put here, because I will give you the slides, a few links. Actually, this was posted by this guy, and I don't remember the name, it's written later in the slides on this website. It's in 2010, so 2010. It's being used quite a lot, and actually you find various links explaining the same thing, so you can go around. And actually, I will also mention there are some additional extensions to it, which are not present in the original version, which I think are important for us. And so the first thing is that it's based on the usual thing now. I think you all know about the fork model, like on GitHub, you fork, you do your contribution, you push, but we look mainly at a single main reference repository. So when I say this, I mean there are many forks of a single repository, and one is the true repository, the one from which you fork. Even if from a Git point of view this doesn't exist, they are all peer-to-peer in a sense. So we look to the main one. Say it could be AiiDA core, or it could be one of your plugins. So the first thing is there are two branches, which are the two main branches you should always have. And in the original proposal, the guy called them develop and master, which is also what we are doing in AiiDA core, for instance. And what are these two there for? So master really is a place where you only commit when you're making a release. That's the main definition. So the fact of making a commit in master in this model means making a release. Then on top of this, you still want to tag it with git tags, because in principle you can have multiple commits you're pushing in there. So you want to say this is version 1.0, but you don't want to commit in master if you are not making a new release. What they say in their explanation is actually, in the way you should think it, you could put in place automatic triggers on Git that when you get a commit or on master, you actually do the release. And so this should be the latest commit should be the latest stable release. In develop instead, you keep doing new features that will end up in the next upcoming release. Okay, that's the main difference. So you keep working here, and when you're ready, you make a new release by putting things also in master. Now you want to do a new feature. What you do, you create a new branch, branching off develop. You start making your commit, and at this point, the idea is that you still don't know in which version this new feature will appear. You start working on it. Maybe in the meantime, you do 2 or 3 new releases. And as long as you don't merge it back, this feature will be just living in your branch. And only when you're ready, then you merge it. In the original definition, the only thing you cannot use are master and develop, of course. And then since these have specific meaning, you cannot use any name which starts with release dash or hotfix dash, because they have specific meaning. In AiiDA, since we also use GitHub, we want to keep track, especially when you put these branches into the main repository, not in our forks. We want to know what this feature is about. And so to keep track of this, we use the syntax fix dash or underscore, then a number of an issue on GitHub, dash some name to understand what it is. Let's say fix dash 2273 dash fix group names. So in this way, you look at it, you see quickly if it's the one you're interested in. If you want to know more about what's happening, you go in the issue. It's not enforced in any way. You're not enforced to do it. I find it very nice because it helps you to know what you're working on if you just go there. As I said, this is for the potentially far future release. The important thing here from our experience is, say, this is clearly okay in 2 cases. One, you're doing a small feature, something you can do a few commits and merge back. There is no real problem. In the meantime, you can have, let's say, quite a number of commits here. It becomes problematic if mainly if this code in the meantime changes a lot, and you're kind of lagging behind with your feature, because then it becomes harder to merge. And this is even worse if actually here you're putting very important features. And actually what happened to us in the past months, because we had this, we had develop, and then we wanted to do from the alpha 4 to the beta 1, as you have seen, there are a lot of changes. So we started doing in a new branch, so people don't see this. But of course now a number of features were here. So the lesson we learned, and there's no real lesson, it's just an information in a sense. When you know you're going to do this, think very well ahead of what you want to do, if you're happy with this, because this requires a lot of work. In a sense, either you start working here and you freeze your new contributions here, or you do both, but you have to make sure that if you completely change and refactor the code, you move the functions from one module to another. When you merge, you have to solve a lot of merge conflicts. So again, just to be careful, if you want to make a very big feature and change the code a lot, think ahead of what will be the amount of work you have to do at the end, and if you want to continue working both in development and in the feature branch. Now, another important thing is partially what they suggest and partially something we've been discussing a lot in the team and what we're trying now to apply recently, is how to merge back a feature branch. So even if you don't have commits, even if you have commits here, let's say you can do two things. If you, let's say, have no commits here, you can either, let's say, just commit with what is called a fast forward. So basically, this commit just appear in the history. Or actually, what they suggest is to use this option, which actually creates a merge commit. So we really show that this is the merge of this point plus this point, and creates a kind of non-linear history. There is a branching off. And the reason they say you should do this is that even if it's a bit more complex to look at, you know that these three commits belong to the same feature, because once you merge, the fact this thing lived into a branch disappears. In Git, for those who don't know, a branch is just a pointer to the most recent commit. So if you have two branches, these two branches are actually pointers to these two. Once you merge them, you just have a history of commits. You don't know anymore that these three were developed in a different branch while you were committing. So if you do this, you actually see it from the graph. You have a graph which branches and merges again. And it's clear these three live together. And the reason is, if all the discussion is if in a month, in a week, in a year, you want to go back and see how there is a bug here. Is this part of a group of commits? Is it a new feature? I want to maybe revert it back and see what happens. You should be able, from the history, to understand what happened. And from this point of view, this is more like what we are doing now, is to a bit try to understand the difference in Git between what all these concepts are, merging, so doing something like this with a merge commit, or without, so there are various options, rebasing and squashing, etc. So very briefly, squashing means you have a number of commits and you just decide they were temporary commits, you don't want to keep this in the history, you just convert them in a single commit. Okay, this is squashing. Rebasing means that if you have, imagine here you have more commits, you can either merge them, so you have a few here, a few there, and you do some merge operation, or you actually change these commits. In practice, you remove these commits from the history, you create new commits which apply the same changes, but on top of the most recent one. So you're changing the history, so that's something you should do only if you're the only one working on that branch. Otherwise, people will have these commits in their branches, and this creates problems. But if you're in your fork and you're the only one working, that's a good thing, because then your changes are not very mixed with other changes happening in AiiDA core, let's say. But you can just say, okay, I did something, I'm happy to merge. Before merging, and just remove what I did and redo it exactly with the same commit messages and the same changes, but just on top of the most recent commit. So this will appear closer to this. So some commits, my feature, and something else. And again, why this? Because imagine you want to revert this, you want to remove this from the history. In this case, you can just say, okay, before this, I want to remove this, I go here. If here you have a number of commits and they're all merging back here, because I'm doing merges in between, it's hard to go in a specific state of the code in between, okay? And so even GitHub allows you, when you merge, to say I want to do a merge, do a rebase and merge, or sorry, rebase or a squash. So there is no real perfect rule. The idea is that really you should be careful and keep the history of your code clean. So also the commit messages have a meaning. If you go back in the history, you should see what happened. You should try to use as clear as possible messages. And for instance, if you are doing some work just to commit, to send to Travis and see what's happening, either you commit amend, so you don't add new commits, or at the end you clean up your history, so you really have a very clean feature branch with few commits. And ideally, if you think these 3 commits are really 3 independent things, and you want to keep information in the future that these 3 things are independent, like what Tiziano did was to do apply one different futurized, recipe per different feature. So he wanted to keep 1 commit per thing he did. He kept these commits, and so when we merged, we did something like this. So you can see, maybe you squash. I don't remember. I don't know. So we don't squash. Maybe we rebase. But I mean, you can really see. Okay, this commit did this specific operation about integer division. This commit did specific thing about print function, etc. If instead you don't think the history is important of each of them, but it just is a single feature, you can squash them. And then there are also cases in which you might want to decide either to rebase to get something like this, or to merge. So again, if your pull request is 1 feature and you still want to keep the history of the 3 commits, you might want to do this. So you can remove all the Python 3 support, let's say. But if instead each of them is still independent, you just put 2 different fixes in the same pull request, but you won't really, they don't necessarily need to belong to the same feature. You're happy to do a rebase, and you keep the history. So I know this might seem very complex if you never used rebase and merge, etc. And the main message is try to keep the history clean, not to put in unuseful commits, and try to think, or you can play a bit maybe in a repository if you want. We can discuss more with me or with the other people who know about this, what it means, but try to think ahead of what you want, how you want to see the history when you go back in the future and discover what you have been doing. Now, the last feature, which is in the original git-flow description, is hotfix branches. So let's say you have develop, you have been releasing a version 1.2, and you also tagged it, as I said. And now you've been doing a number of new commits, and these are new features, okay? And now you realize there is a bug here, and you want to fix it, but you don't want to make a new release here, because this has new features. Maybe they're not even fully ready, or anyway, you don't want to make a 1.3, because as you learned about semantic versioning, if you have new features, you want to do a 1.3. You just want to do a 1.2.1 where you fix 1 specific bug. So in this case, and here is the case where you're working on the most recent release version, there is no more releases. You create a hotfix branch, and the syntax, sorry, I didn't write it, it's a hotfix dash version number, so hotfix dash 1.2.1. You do your commits here, and once you're ready to release, you put in master. This, as we said, is a definition of new release. You tag it to 1.2.1, and then you also merge it back into develop, because then these fixes will go also in develop. This is a case where you know there is a bug, this applies still to develop, and you want to apply in this way, but you don't want to put this history in 1.2.1. So that's where the git-flow model stops, and that's a full image. You can download a PDF, print it, and put it in your, in your screen if you want. And the author is Vincent Drissen. What is missing here is what happens if I discover a bug fix in this version, or in this version, and already I'm doing a number of releases, because then where should I merge back? I cannot if I merge back 0.1.1 here, I mean, I should merge down here, and it doesn't work, because I have a lot of new things. So the problem is, how do I do what's called support branches, where I won't still support both version 1.0 and 0.2 just for bug fixes? What should I do with master? And so there have been a number of extensions. I found this. I don't know if it's the best one. Actually, one strange thing is they decided to use a different naming, which maybe is even better, but then, what they call here master is develop, and what they call here stable is master. So this, of course, creates a lot of confusion, which in a sense is probably closer to what Git does, because when you create a Git repository, typically you get a master branch. So apart from naming, and sorry about this, I just took the picture from this website. The rest you see is basically the same, and they explain a bit more about you do release candidates, etc. What I want to focus is this part here. So as I said, imagine you have two versions, and this could be the case for you. Let's say you want to support for some time both the plugin for AiiDA 1.0, but also the plugin you had for 0.12, and you want to support both. So you'll have two versions of your plugin, and you want to make bug fixes only, but for both of them. So what they suggest is, okay, you create a branch called support / name of the version you're branching off. And in this branch, you can keep doing commits. Let's say you do something, and then at some point you're happy. You say, okay, that's important to make a new 2.01 or 2.001 even here they do. So what do? Of course, you will not, apart from maybe for the latest one, let's say this one from an old version, you cannot merge back. So you will just keep this, you tag it, and you have this support branch will be maybe called support 102. You can rename it in case, but you keep a new branch which will never merge back into develop, just with the bug fixes of this old version. That's one thing. And this means in particular, so you don't never merge back, and also how do you do the commits there? There are two cases, I would say, then it really depends case by case. But let's say either you discover it's a bug in a piece of code which doesn't exist anymore in the new version. Let's say now, for instance, you're refactoring a lot of your code. So if there was a bug in the piece of code you changed significantly, you don't have it here, so you just apply it here. And maybe if it applies, you do some other commit in here, but this is really a different branch. Or if it's a new version, but still, let's say that file, for example, you have a raw parser which didn't change between versions. Another option is to keep doing the fixes in develop, let's say, with the previous names. And then you just cherry pick that specific commit which has the fix, and you apply it in this branch. And this is exactly one case in which keeping the history clean, this complex explanation I did before, is useful. Because imagine if these three can apply identically onto your hotfix branch, you can, if the history is very clean like this, or even like this, it's very easy to say, take this commit, or take these three commits and apply them in a different branch with a cherry pick command. If you have a very strange history where in here you start merging very often, then it's very hard at the end to cherry pick the exact things you want to do. But in the end, I mean, the main concept is you keep branches to just do the bug fixes, and you release out of them without putting them into stable, unless it's the most recent, and then it's okay because it's the most recent. You can put your release back in. Okay, I think that's it, and I hope it was more or less clear. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer, but with the help of anybody else, of course.